Hello, everyone. This is Will Rosenblum, librarian trainee at the Belmore Memorial Library again. And this week we are going to be looking at The Lord of the Rings and how the book differs from the film adaptations by Peter Jackson. So, just some general information, and to highlight one of the common misconceptions about The Lord of the Rings, it's actually one volume composed of six books, often published in three volumes. Those three volumes being The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. Tolkien did not conceive of The Lord of the Rings as a trilogy. He conceived of it as one novel, one big story. That he would break up as he published it. So The Fellowship of the Ring was published in 1954, The Two Towers just a few months later in 1954, and The Return of the King would come out in 1955 with all of the various appendices and note fields in the back. And when I say six books, there are actually two books per volume. So The Fellowship of the Ring is book 1 and book 2. The Two Towers is book 3 and book 4. And The Return of the King is book 5 and book 6. And you can often get the one volume edition of the whole novel. That contrasts with the films. The films are definitely a trilogy. We have The Fellowship of the Ring was released in theaters in December of 2001, The Two Towers in December of 2002, and The Return of the King in December of 2003. They were very unique in that they were filmed kind of simultaneously, starting at the end of the 90s and then being released in that 3-year period. And they were very successful at the box office. The Return of the King swept the Oscars in 2004, winning all 11 of its nominations. And it was really the only time that a fantasy novel won Best Picture at the Oscars. And I think it was one of the last times that a major box office blockbuster won Best Picture. That's just some general background. And quick spoiler alert, if you haven't read or seen The Lord of the Rings, and you don't want to know what happens, stop now, because we're now going to go through The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, and we're going to highlight the differences from book to film. Now, obviously, we can't get through every difference. Peter Jackson said many, many times on interview that if you tried to film The Lord of the Rings just page by page, it would be an absolute mess. It would be a mess because Tolkien did not write The Lord of the Rings with a mind for cinema. He was a professor of medieval literature at the University of Oxford. His whole perception was one of poetry and literature, and it was not he had no mind for movie making. So where the films are often very visually stunning, a lot of graphics, a lot of action sequences, the books just stick to traditional poetic medieval devices. So the Fellowship of the Ring, as the book definitely differs from the film, starting in the prologue. The prologue in the book is concerning hobbits, Bilbo's first chapter of the Red Book, where he just kind of talks about hobbit culture and then ties in how The Hobbit, published in 1937, how that kind of sets the stage for The Lord of the Rings as its sequel that became much more. In the film, you get this big action-heavy history of Middle-earth. A lot of it is based on the last chapter of the Silmarillion, which was published posthumously in 1977. Tolkien never saw his whole legendarium published. And it's different because starting in the films, they want to grab your attention right from the beginning with heavy action, the last alliance of elves and men, the fall of Sauron, all of that. In the book, you just get a sweet, whimsical introduction to hobbits and how they live, and how the story of Bilbo will set the stage for our tale here. Another big difference, and again, we can't get through every single difference between the books and the films because there are just so many. But we're going to talk some of the most glaring ones. Is you have a 17-year time gap between Bilbo's long-expected party, where he turns 111, and Frodo turns 33, at the long expected party. You don't realize in the films that they share a birthday. There is a big time jump where between the long expected party ending and Gandalf coming back to tell Frodo that Bilbo's magic ring that he left him is indeed the One Ring. In the film, you really just get the impression that Gandalf's gone for a few weeks, goes to Minas Tirith to do some research, and then comes back. But no, in the books, it's 17 years. So Frodo is now 50 years old at the time that he's going to start his journey. Also, the Frodo-Bilbo relationship is different. In the films, they always refer to each other as uncle and nephew, whereas in the book, they just refer to each other as cousins. So the family connection between Bilbo and Frodo's mother is different. That's really a lot of the big stuff in book one in the first half of Fellowship. Also, we have, of course, in the book, we have this whole sequence with a whimsical character named Tom Bombadil and his companion Goldberry that Peter Jackson just completely cut out of the film. Because as fun as that sequence is, it doesn't really advance the main plot. It does kind of seem out of place. But Tolkien devotees do love Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, and it is a fun little section of the book that didn't make it into the film. And of course, the most glaring thing in book one, in the first half of Fellowship, is Arwen's character. In the book, and rightfully so, Peter Jackson tries to bring in more female representation, which is one of Tolkien's main criticisms, by having Arwen take the injured Frodo to Rivendell. She defeats the Ringwraiths by summoning the water horses and saves Frodo and the wounded Frodo and brings him to Rivendell. In the book, it is not Arwen. It is Glorfindel, an elven warrior who is a close companion of Elrond. So a lot of people who've seen the films, know the iconic chase sequence of Arwen on horseback, are really thrown when they realize that that was not Arwen at all. In fact, she hardly has a role in the proper story. Moving into book two, the second half of Fellowship, we have the Council of Elrond is a bit different in that the Fellowship does not fully form at the council. The chapter ends with Sam coming out of the bushes saying, "I've been listening the whole time and Frodo's not going anywhere without me." But the rest of that wonderful dramatic sequence in the film with the music playing and Aragorn says, "You have my sword," and Legolas, "You have my bow," and Gimli says, "You have my axe," and the whole Fellowship forms in that beautiful, iconic sequence. That doesn't actually happen in the book at all. It's a bit more slowly paced. And the other two big differences in that second half of Fellowship in book two is that in Gandalf's fight with the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm in the Mines of Moria, Sir Ian McKellen in the film says, "You shall not pass." That became the big meme-worthy line. But he actually got it wrong, and Peter Jackson loved it and kept it. In Tolkien's book, he says, "You cannot pass," which really doesn't sound as awesome as "you shall not pass." So it was one change that I think turned out better. And finally, at the end of Fellowship, in the last chapter, the breaking of the Fellowship at Amon Hen, Frodo decides to leave the Fellowship without knowing that the rest of the Fellowship is under attack. He doesn't know. Boromir tries to take the ring, and then Frodo just decides, "I'm going to leave." He doesn't see the Uruk-hai attack Aragorn. He has no idea that that's happening. Sam follows him, and there's the dramatic sequence of Frodo pulling Sam out of the water, and they decide to go on together. But there is no indication at that point that the Fellowship is under attack. Meanwhile, in the film, you have that dramatic sequence where Aragorn says, "Run, Frodo, go," and Frodo sees what's happening and chooses to go anyway. So now moving into the Two Towers, in that first chapter, we see Boromir's death. Aragorn finds Boromir full of arrows under a tree after the attack, and they part in friendship as Boromir realizes that he was corrupted by the ring. And the Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli sequence of deciding to hunt for Merry and Pippin and save them is pretty much the same. Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White with a little bit more explanation as to his encounter and final battle with the Balrog. But what's really different in book three, the first half of the Two Towers, is the Battle of Helm's Deep. In the film, we have this dramatic, action-packed cinematic battle where the elves come to aid the Rohirrim, and the Uruk-hai blow up the main the main gate with a gunpowder bomb. Yeah, none of that happens. It's one chapter in the book where they have this battle against the Uruk-hai. Gandalf comes to the rescue with Erkenbrand, a Rohirrim character that you do not meet. In the movies, they just have it as Éomer in the movies, but in the book, Éomer is already with Theoden and Aragorn at the Hornburg. And the sequence is going to be very different after that battle. In the book, we have all of Gandalf confronting Saruman, Pippin looking into the Palantir, and Gandalf and Pippin riding for Minas Tirith. All of that happens in the Two Towers. We know for the films that's all held until Return of the King, and the same thing in book 4, the second half of Two Towers, which follows Frodo, Sam, and Gollum. It's more or less the same, except Faramir, Boromir's brother, does not take Frodo and Sam and Gollum to Osgiliath. Rather, he lets them go. There's no conflict there when he finds them in Ithilien. Frodo and Gollum does not turn Frodo and Sam against each other. They enter Shelob's lair together in the Two Towers, not in the Return of the King. And the Two Towers book ends with the orcs take the stunned Frodo after Shelob stung him into Cirith Ungol, and Sam realizes he's still alive. I have to go and save him myself. So it's a very cliffhanger, dramatic ending. It's why a lot of people back in the 50s and 60s had these pins that said Frodo lives, because that cliffhanger ending of the Two Towers was that Frodo was really alive. And so now moving into the Return of the King, the first half, again, the book 5 is going to follow the rest of the Fellowship. Book 6 is going to come back to Frodo and Sam, just like it was in Two Towers. And Return of the King is a little bit different, also in the pacing, but there are some glaring details. In the film, Denethor, Boromir and Faramir's father, just seems to be in shock and grief over Boromir's death. There's no other indication that he's being manipulated, whereas in the book, we find out that he has a Palantir just like Saruman, and that Sauron has been poisoning his mind. But other than that, in that first half of Return of the King, there aren't too many major differences apart from, Gandalf and Pippin were already on their way. The Rohirrim are already on their way. The lighting of the beacons isn't quite as essential for that. The beacons are already lit at the time of the book starting. I guess the biggest difference here is in the Siege of Gondor. We see Gandalf confront the Lord of the Nazgul, who's referred to as the Witch King in the films, but in the book, he's not referred to that way. But the Witch King, the Lord of the Nazgul, does not break Gandalf's staff the way he does in the extended edition of the films. Gandalf just kind of checks him at the gate, and that's it. And ultimately, on the Pelennor, Éowyn, who you don't know is Éowyn in the books, she's going by Dernhelm, and Merry is with her and doesn't know it's her. She still kills the Witch King with the famous "I am no man," just like in the film. But not too different. The Black Gate confrontation is the same, other than Merry is not present when the rest of the Fellowship goes to the Black Gate to buy Frodo time to destroy the ring. And that first half, that book 5, ends with just the Fellowship is at the Black Gate with the armies of Gondor and Mordor, and they're going to buy Frodo some time. Book 6 again follows Frodo and Sam after Sam saves Frodo from Cirith Ungol, and Gollum's death is a little bit different in that In the films, okay, you have that dramatic sequence of Frodo and Gollum falling into the volcano together, and then Sam pulls Frodo out. Not quite the same, really. Gollum bites off Frodo's finger and then just falls into the volcano with the ring. That confrontation between Frodo and Gollum is a little different. And then the ending of the Return of the King is very slowly paced, with the Fellowship reuniting at the Fields of Cornwallen, unlike in the film, which just kind of has them all reuniting at Minas Tirith. Aragorn is coronated as king, and the biggest difference here is that when the hobbits return to the Shire, they find that Saruman, who Wormtongue did not kill like he did in the extended editions of the films, Saruman is alive, and he and Wormtongue have destroyed the Shire. This chapter is called "The Scouring of the Shire," and after the hobbits defeat Saruman. Here, Wormtongue actually kills Saruman, and he's defeated. The hobbits have to rebuild the Shire, and it's really a beautiful commentary on, after the hardship of war, is home really going to be the same? And in this case, it's not. Sam uses the seeds that Galadriel gives him and plants a beautiful Malorn tree, and the Shire is going to bloom and be beautiful once more. And finally, that ending chapter with the Grey Havens is more or less the same as it is in the film, where Frodo sails to the Undying Lands with Gandalf and Elrond and Galadriel and Bilbo, and Sam is left to finish the story, having been given the Red Book. And that's basically, again, there are plenty more differences. I just kind of did the highlights. Like I said, the films and the books do differ a great deal. Not only in the difference between novel and cinema, but also in many of the details that we have discussed. So if you have any requests, please email to ask@belmorelibrary.org with your subject line as lecture series. I hoped you enjoyed this little talk about the Lord of the Rings. I've always been a big Tolkien fan, so I love it. But really, any area of interest is available. I can do history, literature, more popular culture, philosophy, art, music, science, or anything else, any topic, as long as I know enough about it or can quickly learn enough about it. I'm happy to make any kind of lecture video. I've been having fun with this, and I hope you've been enjoying it too. All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.